Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Connected by Community, a podcast brought to you to bring you various business interests, nonprofits, and local community interests around our community. Today, I am privileged to have with me a guest that's near and dear to my heart because of an issue that's happened to me both personally, and I guess through my family, unfortunately, and working with clients, and it's around medical debt. So first of all, I want to welcome Mr. Scott Crawford to our program.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Appreciate you setting this up.
Yeah, happy to have you. And like I said, it's something, unfortunately, not only have I learned through textbooks, but I have been involved with personally. And so I want to jump into that in just a moment. But before we do that, so that our listeners kind of know a brief bit about you and what we'd like to know what brought you to doing this, but maybe where did you come from? Are you always from South Carolina? Or are you from, like a lot of folks, new to the area? Or have you been here a while?
Newish.
Yeah.
My wife and I grew up in Virginia.
Uh-huh.
Our careers took us out to California. And about 3 years ago, we moved back. Her family's in Mount Pleasant.
Okay.
Her parents, her brother and family, and her brother and all the kids either went to or are going to Clemson now. So we've spent a fair amount of time up in the upstate over the years. Football games, now basketball games. Hopefully, maybe Friday a baseball game.
Yeah.
Watch some of the World Series. And so that brought us here to the East Coast, and then my mom moved down from Virginia. She lives in Clemson now, so it's a big family affair here in South Carolina.
So you got the mountains and the beach, right?
We have the mountains and the beach. Yeah, California had that too, but it's the
taxes are crazy there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a different show, right?
You can do a lot more here with it.
Well, you can come back and we can talk about California. Actually, I don't even know if I shared this with you before, but I actually traveled. I was in Fresno State back in college, another program. California is a beautiful, beautiful state, but has problems. But we'll, again, not jump onto that for today.
Grab a beer sometime.
Yeah. Let's talk about, though, what brings you here today. So obviously you've had a career and a good background, what brings you to what we call God's country here in South Carolina. But what really brings you to this podcast today? And if you don't mind sharing a little bit about your story and medical debt.
Sure. So my wife and I contributed to organizations because we traveled through donations, financial donations. And now that we're semi-retired, have time to do that. And just over 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with bladder cancer. And I'm fortunate enough, I have the insurance. We could afford the co-pays, deductibles, but you still get those bills. And those bills can come in pretty fast and they stack up. And as you're going through them, my mom just happened to be with me. And I said, I don't know how most people can afford sudden bills, accident, injury, a diagnosis out of the blue. These are unexpected bills. And my mom simply looked at me and said, that was me when you were a kid. Her husband died when I was 5. And it put her into a cycle of medical debt for 5 years that I didn't know until that point in time in my 50s that she went through that struggle. She just did a great job of hiding it from us and getting through that. And so that inspired me initially to say, I should go out and find a person to go help that was in her position. And when I mentioned it to one of my doctors, he said, go Google. There's some charities out there that do something like this. I don't know who they are, but go do a little research first. And sure enough, I came upon RIP Medical Debt. And they're an organization, and I'll get into the details, that'll go out and retire debt for those that need it the most. And so instead of finding one person, which was my concept in retiring their debt, they're able to go out and find thousands of folks that need the help. And we can get into the mechanics of that here in a minute. So I called up the CEO and said, please tell me about your organization. I want to make sure you're legit. And great conversation, did a little more homework, and I started volunteering for them through campaigns. So I did a national campaign 2 years ago. Turned out fairly well. Last year I did the first South Carolina campaign. Turned out great, and we're in the middle of our second South Carolina campaign.
That's awesome. And, you and I were talking before we got on. I want to share with the listeners because not a lot of people even know this about me personally. My wife has a lifelong condition, neurological condition with MS, and if people know something about it, great. If not, it affects you lifelong. You don't necessarily get better. Right. And unfortunately from that has a lot of ongoing both medical cost and especially drug cost. And beyond that, my mother was disabled when I was young. We try to have a sense of humor, so hopefully my listeners can appreciate this. I always say it's kind of like a country song, and it's not. We're blessed people. But I've had to help navigate with my mom and now my wife all these issues. And just by chance of fortune, my wife's expertise is in medical billing. So she actually worked for a medical billing company. She was a nursing major, switched to become a psychology major, which means she can tell me all the psychological things I do wrong on a medical basis, but a different show. My point is, I'm a CFP, Certified Financial Planner. So from a financial end, you got a financial guy. You have a wife that was insurance and a nursing major. We probably, I'm not bragging, I'm just saying, of the most qualified people in America, I'd put us in the top 1% of people to be able to intellectually handle this stuff, right?
Right.
What else could, it's almost a dream team, right? And we can't figure this crap out, right?
Right.
I have the economics to pay, like you. I have the insurance. I have a wife who knows all this stuff. And to this day, because my wife does my mother-in-law's, or her mother, my mother-in-law, medical stuff, there's oftentimes where we have $50 and $60 bills. We can't figure it out. You know what we do? We pay it because the time to figure it out, to sit on hold with someone for 5 hours is not worth $50.
Not worth it.
But I feel for people. We say it all the time. We pay this bills. We are fortunate to have $50 to send to someone that my time is worth more than $50. So talk about briefly both sides of it. There's two sides of this I see. And unfortunately in America, and this is not the purpose of this podcast, but we do have a two sides of the economic coin. But I want you to talk about how this can affect both the wealthy and the poor. And as I see it, and I'm going to shut up in a second, because fortunately in my business, we tend to work more with the wealthy, but it could take someone in wealth and give them grave economic harm or hardship in the problem. So talk about that. And then talk about the person who's struggling. Maybe they got 3.5 kids or whatever, making ends meet, good mom, good dad, doing the deal, but this puts them into bankruptcy. Can you talk about both those?
Talk a lot more about the folks that can't afford it necessarily in concept, but I do have a friend, West Point graduate, and he heard about what I was doing. He's like, "How can RIP help him?" And I said, in his case, very successful in life, but his wife ended up with a condition that ended up costing a lot of money, and then on the heels of that, his daughter did too, and he's got hundreds of thousands of dollars of bills. So even somebody that theoretically is wealthy, he's hit a real hardship, and all of his West Point buddies and Army folks are pulling together to help him in that case. In the case of RIP medical debt, they look for two metrics. One, anybody that's making less than 4 times the federal poverty level, or the medical debt is 5% greater than your income. If you meet one of those two criteria, you get through, and they can help you out. But just some statistics. Again, I have to go to the glasses for this.
That's okay.
Just to paint the big picture, in the U.S., there's 100 million adults, when that represents $200 billion in medical debt. Now, keep in mind, this is categorized medical debt. A lot of people put it on credit cards, and it goes to a completely different category. You might
So then
borrow
we don't
money.
know that it is there.
Exactly. Also might go to family and friends giving money, and so it's actually bigger than what they could pull together. That's about half of the adults in some form will struggle with health care and the related debt. And what hit me with my mom's case is, here's somebody that's got 3 kids, lost her husband. Just that alone was bad enough, but she had to go through that whole it was lymphoma cancer process, and she's just stuck. Just dealing with the healthcare, as you know, is hard enough. Then you add the anxiety, the distress of a financial burden on top of it. I don't think there's too many combinations a human being can go through that is that difficult.
Absolutely.
When it comes to struggles in life. And then the final one is 3 times likely greaterhood that individuals will suffer the anxiety, the distress when they're going through this medical debt on top of dealing with healthcare. It's just a brutal combination. And so the gentlemen that founded RIP Medical Debt were debt collectors. They were executives. And so they were on that side of it, and they saw thousands of cases of people that had medical debt. So when they retired, they were compelled to try to do something about it. So they leveraged their expertise in buying debt at significant discounts, and then turning around, and instead of collecting on that debt, which debt collectors do, they just retired the whole thing. The folks receiving the relief have no idea what's going on. They get a letter in the mail that says your debts are gone and we'll help you restore credit if needed. And so it's just an angel comes out of nowhere.
That's
and
awesome.
Helps them out. And we just had, in this campaign, we gave RIP money, the funds, right before the holiday season. And so all these folks got these letters before Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever they happen to be celebrating. So it was a tremendous gift in and of itself, plus the holiday season. Some of the testimonials that came out of that were great. So I never get to see the people that receive it, but I do see the testimonials, and we helped over 12,700 families last year.
Man, that's impactful because, I mean, you could be talking about like a single mom making the rent or keeping the house. You could be talking about, gosh, and maybe you have some statistics on this, and if you don't, I'd love to even find some. What's the medical outcome? And neither one of us are medical doctors, but the stress it put, if you have a heart condition or cancer or something serious, that stress, I know personally, the stress it put on my mom, for instance, growing up. But, are people less likely to recover and get back on their feet and pay their bills?
They are, because they got to face trade-offs. And I haven't seen a number to this, but it comes down from folks in the categories that they're serving: food, shelter, clothing, or you don't get your medical care. Right. A lot of people will choose, I've got to eat, I've got to feed my family, I've got to get the basic necessities. I'm going to forego that next doctor's visit. And then that's where it really becomes a bad situation. So that is one of the worst impacts of this cycle.
So totally curious, have you guys seen a rise in the need of this through COVID or inflation? Did any of those type things affect it, or has it just always been there and has kind of steadily increased?
Yeah, it's always been there, steadily increased. COVID, I'm sure the numbers will eventually come out that it didn't help, because the cycle takes, like the debt that they're buying, it's been on the books for a long time.
Gotcha.
Right, so usually a year or 2 years it's been sitting there. And then the hospitals, the providers will finally say, we're not going to write it off, we'll try to sell it. And then that's where RAP medical debt has. In South Carolina right now, I think they have access to 50 million, if not more. And it comes and goes. Mm-hmm. But in South Carolina, to get even more specific, those numbers I gave on a national level, there's, back to the glasses again, there's 22%, as I mentioned, they're 22% in South Carolina have medical debt. That's the second highest in the U.S. If you put it into a non-white category, it goes up to 28. If you look at nationwide, 8% don't have insurance. It's 11% in South Carolina. And again, if non-white category, it's 15%. So it's an exacerbated problem here in the state. And that's why when I put the campaign together, the first one I did is national, and I've never done fundraising before, so I've learned a lot. One of the things that helps is doing it locally. So instead of a national campaign, let's get it focused on South Carolina because we live here now. And it's really helped. I still have friends and family that want to participate because of my relationship with them, but more and more I'm getting folks that are local. This year we've got First Citizens Bank donated a significant amount to kickstart the campaign this year, so extremely grateful for their contribution. And looking forward to hopefully more companies and organizations that are based here in South Carolina to participate as well. Giving is a personal thing. I almost hate asking for it, because if it doesn't resonate, that's fine. I don't want you to feel compelled to give because I asked. But I've been surprised at how many people, even strangers, when they hear the story secondhand, they'll reach back out to me. It's like, I heard the story, just like you. I've been in that situation in some form or fashion. How can I help support the cause? So all I'm really trying to do is be a conduit for the organization, get the word out. Where it resonates, then hopefully opens their hearts and maybe their wallets.
Well, and I'll tell you, you're being really gracious and kind, so let me be the harsh guy. You'll be the good cop, I'll be the bad cop.
Fair enough.
No, and I mean this, and part of this wasn't honestly until, for my listeners that haven't, and viewers who don't know this about me until today, my mom being disabled, having been a CFP, and it's one thing to hear the textbooks, but to know how it affects people and walking the walk with clients, that's a privilege that I've had. And I won't call it a privilege, I'll call it a horror story, but I can relate because of my mom and my wife. I can tell you firsthand, if you don't think it can't happen to you, I don't care if you're the CEO of Michelin, and I don't know who the CEO, I'm not picking on Michelin, they're here locally, or BMW. In other words, I don't care how high you have achieved in life, tomorrow your feet can be cut out from underneath you. And if you don't think this can happen to you, it's the phone call you get on Tuesday at 2:35 that you weren't planning on. And I'm going to share a very personal example. I got that phone call, and I think it was at Tuesday about 2:30. I should know the time. I get a phone call. No joke. This is exactly how it happened. My wife had some eye problems. Her eye was itchy, right? Red. And being the frugal people that we are, she has gone to Walmart to get her glasses because it was the cheapest place, or eye exam or whatever. And she said, I'm going to see the optometrist. I think I'm getting that right, not the ophthalmologist, the person who's not the medical doctor, and see what he says. And she went back, I think, 2 or 3 times. And finally, she told me, no offense to optometrists, but she said, I'm going to go see a full-blown doctor because I think I got an eye problem. I said, great, that's fine. She goes to, I believe, Clemson Eye here locally, sees a doctor. In fact, if I knew that doctor, I would give him props because he called it, but with no bedside manner, unfortunately. He basically looked at her in about 30 seconds and said, you don't have an eye problem. You have a neurological problem. You have MS. So just like that, our world flipped upside down, right? And my wife had all these other symptoms. She had not been putting 2 and 2 together. And I so didn't believe him, I almost didn't go with my wife to the neurologist appointment. My words were, I'm going to almost quote, what does an eye doctor know about a neurological problem? Kathy is my wife. I said, he has to be wrong, because obviously we were devastated, right? I sincerely in my heart did not think he was right. So we go to the neurologist. He looks at her records. He goes, I can't give you 100%, but he's most likely right. You need to go get an MRI and we'll confirm it, and go down to Atlanta. Of course, we did both of those things very, very quickly. We were thankful to be diagnosed so quickly because people struggle with MS and not know what it is. It's kind of a hidden disease while it's hurting you chronically. My point in telling that story is just to give a personal life story to say, here you have 2 people, 2 kids. I had worked and finally achieved some level of financial and business and community success, where I'm at in my career, and all of a sudden knocked down, right? It is a leveler. It's an equalizer. I don't care who you are. That was kind of when I started my question. I don't care if you're here, socioeconomically, it just doesn't matter.
Right.
And if you're walking along fine and you're running 15 miles a day and you're in the best health, great, you should be. Teach me a lesson, that's great. But this stuff can still happen. Is really my whole point in this rambling 3 minutes.
100%. That was me. I've kept myself in pretty good shape over the years, and when I had the first indication, went to an urgent care, the kind of non-flippant.
Right.
He came back and after a 5-minute urine test and said, well, you either got an infection, can't remember the second one, or cancer. And I said, what? What'd you say? He's like, hey, you might have cancer. Now you need to go do the following things with the urologist. And then you go down that path, and then sure enough, they come. It's like, hey, you have cancer. They always say the 3 things you don't want to hear is you have cancer. And it really does hit you hard. Thankfully, Linda, my wife, was in the room, because the doctor went through all these things. And Brian, I listened as intently as I ever have in my life. And I walked out, and when I went to make the appointment, she said, okay, what did the doctor want you to do? And I had it completely wrong. I just had to, in the next 6 weeks, I knew this, and Linda's like, no. He said, you have to do this in the next 6 days. And so just that scenario, just get your head spinning. And then you have to go, like we mentioned, the whole process with the billing. And
then you got to deal with all this life stuff.
Yeah, the life stuff, and then the billing. And that's where I said to my mom, I don't know how most people can take this on. And to give you an example of how, and this wasn't even extreme, but it just really struck me. I had somebody calling me a bit later through all the procedures, like, you owe us $30. And I was like, well, I'm pretty sure I've been paying the bills. Tell me more, because it was a collection agency, not the hospital. And was actually came from the radiologist. They transposed a number in the address, and the bill had been going somewhere else. So instead of them tracking me down, it's like, hey, you still owe $30, they just turned it over to a collection agency, and they were bombarding me, phone call. And I was, for $30, it's like you said, you would just pay it because it wasn't worth it. I was like, how can that possibly be worth it to you to spend all that time and energy to collect $30? But they do. And I can't imagine if it had zeros on the end of that, what the levels they go to. Actually, I can't imagine, because if you go watch some YouTubes of debt collectors in the past, I'm not saying all debt collectors are like this, but there's some that had really, and may still have really bad practices, such as finding your boss's phone number and calling them at night to say, hey, your employee owes us money. And just some of the things you see them do, it's just almost nefarious. So,
that's a great question. And I don't know if your organization has this, or if you have found through your research, are there things that consumers can do to help protect themselves? Obviously, your organization, you help, or helping people. What can people do to help themselves?
Yeah, that part I really haven't been that involved in. But what I have seen is the Federal Trade Commission a few years ago noted that medical debt collection were the highest number of complaints. So at that level, they've really started getting more strict on the practices of medical debt. And RIP Medical Debt last year hired an executive to focus on policy as well. Because right now they're solving the problem that exists this very minute. Somebody needs help paying a bill. But that doesn't solve the long-term problem. So there's 3 areas that they're helping shape policy. One is to get access to insurance. The other is to get access to financial assistance, which goes to your question. And then the other is to eradicate bad practices on debt collection and give better information about debt information so that organizations can handle it better. So as the organization continues to grow and hopefully thrive from a charitable perspective, they're going to be able to greater influence things that happen in the industry and in Washington.
So if I can reiterate a couple things there from a financial planning standpoint, we encourage everyone should have insurance. And generally, I'm generalizing, there are some people that are pinched in the middle. If you essentially have no economic resources, there are government programs typically called Medicaid. I'm simplifying. There's other programs. You should be on that. You know, if you don't have something, especially if you have children, but also yourself, take care of yourself. That's taking care of your children. Probably at no or very limited cost to you, the person. And then the step up from that would be a subsidized, what's called Obamacare ACA type insurance plan, which can be fully paid for and sometimes better than the Medicaid. Medicaid may limit who you can go to, but you can at least get some care. But don't be scared of the ACA plans that are subsidized, but you do have to make a certain minimum amount. And then even up to the same 400, I think it's the same 400% amount, it can be subsidized pretty heavily. And there are resources to get help with that. I don't have all those numbers memorized. I don't personally do those types of insurance, but we can connect people who are listening. Please call my office. I'm happy to, over the phone, at least me or someone on my team, direct you to someone who can get you help. Don't go without coverage because you think there's nothing for you. We do find, I will say, and again, we don't have time for that in this podcast, there are people almost in the middle of those two that get pinched. We have seen a couple problems there, and that's a unique situation. It's unfortunate, but still reach out for help. Go to Blue Cross Blue Shield. They're not the only, and I'm not advocating their insurance. They just have been a predominant provider in South Carolina, at least someone to check with and start, shop other people, again, not promoting them. But I think those resources, and then from there, you could get your own group. You can get group plans on your own if you're an employer, or you can be on a group plan of your employer, or you can be on a non-subsidized plan. There are Obamacare plans or ACA, and then non-subsidized for people that make too much money. Point is, there are choices. If you don't have insurance, it's most likely, I'm generalizing, 98% of the time you should have it. If not, you're probably making a financial mistake.
Yeah, and if you, we'll give them the more details towards the end of the podcast. But RIP Medical Debt, it's long,
Right.
.org, and they have one of the links on the site are resources, and there's a whole list of areas where people could go to get help.
Okay, great. Well, if that's the case, we'll put that on Connected by Community website so that our viewers or listeners,
Perfect.
if they're listening to this podcast, they can find that. So we'll get our folks to do that, to partner, because I really, there's a lot of issues I'm passionate about. This is one because I think we're all one slip or fall or bad ER visit away from getting the news, and I think it can affect every American or even person that's somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
I know different countries have ways to help with this, but it can affect a lot of people. So I think it's important to do, and I want to challenge our listeners out there that are of means. Whether it's $50, it's $500, it's $1,000, or it's $1 million, consider partnering with RIP to retire this debt once and for all to impact others' lives. It's interesting, Scott. I have a lot of clients that actually that want to give money away, and they say, "Why? Who would I give it to?" And I'm like, "Well, I got a list." Things I certainly am personally passionate about. And there are also some organizations you question, do they really do what they say they're going to do?
Yeah.
Is the money really getting to where it needs to go? So tell me about your experience. Is this organization really making a difference in people's lives?
That was my first question. That's why I called the CEO and said, "Are you guys legit?" And they hadn't finished it yet because they were still relatively new, but they have since completed the Charity Navigator process, and they have a 100 rating out of 100.
Right.
GuideStar has them at a platinum level. So the two most traditional metrics, if you will, for charities, they're at the very top. You can't get any higher. The one that put me over top is Mackenzie Scott of Amazon fame. She's got a team that took, her millions and millions and millions of dollars that she wanted to donate, and they vetted out all these different organizations, RIP Medical Debt being one of them, and I think it's been a little over a year ago now, she donated $50 million.
That's awesome.
That one was like, okay, they're legit. I'll work with you guys. And the really amazing thing, because the founders were on the debt collection side, they have a debt operations team that does a phenomenal job of finding the debt and retiring it. On average, for every dollar that comes in, they retire $100 of debt. So usually we talk
That's a
about
great
charities.
return.
Yeah. Well, then you just said the word. Usually you don't say.
That's how I'm thinking.
Yeah, you don't think return on investment for a charity, but 100. I've never worked. If I had that in my software career to sell,
You could sell a lot, couldn't
I'm
you?
going to retire at 35, not 55. So it's an amazing ratio. And the campaign we did last year in South Carolina, my goal was to raise 50,000. And I still don't know how we got there. We raised 57. That turned into 12 million. So it was almost 200 to $1. And that's that.
Hold on, I want to make sure I heard. Say that again.
Raised $57,000.
Yeah.
They retired $12 million in debt.
Holy cow, that's awesome.
And then that translated, most importantly, to 12,700 families. And again, they use the metrics. They're not paying it for me. They're paying it for the people that truly, truly need it financially. And so, yeah, when you see that number come in, and again, this was right around Christmas when I got the results, I was just like, okay, I don't need to go to the tree right now. I got everything I could ask for this year. And so the goal this year is 80. Again, First Citizens gave it a nice bump, so I'm pretty confident we can get there. Right now, we're sitting over a little over 50% of the goal. So a bit more work to get there. And then once we say, okay, RIP Medical Debt, release the funds, then it's up to them to find the debt, do the translation. So you never know exactly what ratio you're going to get. But even on average, if it's $100 to everyone that comes in, it's just phenomenal result.
Man, that's impactful. I did not know that. So, again, this has been eye-opening to me. And I think I want to just take a moment as we get close to the end here. And maybe I need to look into the camera there. Where are you? So I want to challenge our listeners, specifically those that have the ability, and even if you don't have the ability, go out and cut somebody's grass and earn $50 and donate it. Especially, I'm a big return on investment guy, obviously doing what I do, but you have the opportunity to impact someone's life potentially forever. I don't want to overstate it, but I'm thinking about, I was fortunate to grow up in a 2-parent household, but the single mom, single dad, the widowed mom, widowed dad, who is struggling, man, could this make an impact, right? Like, not on my podcast I got this excited, but I'm like, we got to go find a way, maybe we need some churches involved in this. Maybe we need, I'm sitting here thinking about my kids' youth group. Maybe they need to do a car wash and raise $1,000. And I can say, hey, will you raise that $1,000? You really just retired a bunch of debt and made an impactful difference, right?
Yeah. They basically raised $100,000.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Right? So we'll certainly see. But I really want to challenge my listeners and audience and clients and those. And in fact, I'm going to tell my kids about this because I think it's a great way to always try to teach my children, give back from what you're able to do. And boy, to leverage that up and get a return on investment, that makes a financial advisor excited.
Yeah, it does. I can see it. It makes me excited too.
That's really, really cool. Is there anything else about the organization that maybe I didn't ask the right question that our listeners might want to know as they go out into the community and maybe consider this? As you mentioned, is a personal activity. I'm being the bad cop and saying it ain't personal, guys. Do it. You need to give to this.
Yeah, it's, they're mission-based. Everybody that I work with over there, they're 100% focused on the results, and they're great people to work with. They, if you ever wanted to spin up your own campaigns, it's very easy to do. When you go to the website, they're happy to support you. Mm-hmm. They put up the website for me. I just give them the content right before the show. It's like, hey, any latest statistics I need to know about? And then they'll take this podcast and they'll publicize it as well. They're great about setting up the TV interviews I've had, the Post and Courier. We've had a couple articles. So just fantastic people and really work hard to drive the results that they have. And total $8.5 billion that they've retired. And so that represents millions of families in the U.S.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
just
awesome.
amazing results, and kind of really just getting started. They're, compared to a lot of organizations out there, they're relatively young.
That's great. So one of the things I want to do is I want to lead by example. In a minute, I want you to share where people could find you.
Yeah.
But our firm, Valentine Capital Advisors, is going to kick this off and commit $1,000, and we'll see if we can't even do more of that, maybe through some fundraisers and partnerships. But we're going to seed it with at least $1,000 to help out, and I'm hoping you'll tell me the final results after this year of how many clients or how many households we impact, and hopefully that's meaningful. And then we're going to ask folks to also that we know in the community maybe to partner to do that. So all of our Connected by Community podcasts, even if you're not a client, I want you to consider this as well. But you have my commitment there, and certainly wish you well with that.
Appreciate that.
So yeah, we thank you for being here today.
And we can work out the details. Happy to provide a matching for the folks that are coming in through your efforts.
Awesome. We'll connect regarding that. So how would, if someone's listening and they're in Oklahoma or, they're in wherever, Idaho, and they say, gee, I happen to see that podcast, that's impactful. I'd like to give $100. I'd like to give $50. How would they do that?
Yeah, so if you go to, it's a long URL, it's ripmedicaldebt.org. And if you're compelled to give to the South Carolina campaign, just go to the campaign section, search for South Carolina. You'll see Scott Crawford under there, so you know you've got the right one, and more than happy to take those donations there. If you're in Oklahoma, or I was looking around, Dallas, Texas has a campaign going on right now. You could probably find campaigns local if you're not here in South Carolina. And if that resonates with you, like I said, even $1 turns into 100, so every little bit helps.
Awesome. I certainly will encourage our listeners to do that. And we will have, because it's a long URL, somehow or another, I might be getting in trouble with Miss Anna, but we will have on Connected by Community an ability to do that somehow or another. But thank you for coming and sharing the message and letting our viewers know about this and how to make an impact.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. And thank you again for all of our listeners for tuning in to this edition to Connected by Community. This was a special edition because I think this is a way we can all, this is what this community is about. It's about community. It's about making a difference where you're able to. Please reach out to RIP and try to help out any amount you can. And if you have questions, certainly reach out to the organization. Until we see you next time, go out and make our community great.